In a few minutes, Asa Hutchinson will begin his second and final four-year term as the 46th Chief Executive Officer of Arkansas. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to AETN's live coverage of the inaugural ceremonies. Our cameras are standing by in the House of Representatives chamber, where Mr. Hutchinson will address a joint session of the General Assembly. And a bit later this morning, we'll bring you live coverage as well of the formal inaugural, the oath of office from the steps of the state capitol. With me here in the studio are two gentlemen with some experience in that House chamber. Former Democratic Representative Warwick Sabin of Little Rock and former Speaker Jeremy Gillum, now of Conway, but still of Mr. Hutchinson's Republican Party. Gents, thanks for coming in this morning.
Thanks for having us.
We have, the three of us, been here before, in a sense, at an inaugural.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So the ritual, the rite, the ceremony is, it's always a refreshing thing to see, but maybe even inspiring, we'll see. But it's an important part of governance in Arkansas. Sets the stage, if you will, for the next, certainly the next legislative session, possibly even beyond.
Yeah, and I think we have two different perspectives on it, because the speaker here actually served as speaker twice, was probably more involved in the organization and setup. You know, as part of the minority party over 3 terms. You know, I got to sit in the chamber, not from the rostrum like he did. So we probably have different perspectives, and I'd actually be curious more about sort of your perspective on a day like this and what was involved in organizing that and how you tried to set the tone for all of us who were coming into a new session.
Well, this offers so much promise at the beginning of a session, and especially at the beginning of a governor's term. And so logistically, you want to make sure that all the trains are running on time and that, you know, all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and everything's moving forward. But from a more of a theme, you know, you want to make sure that you're conveying that it is a new start, that it is a fresh opportunity for service and for the citizens to be able to look towards that chamber that day, hear the governor, and really kind of set a tone for the way that the next 2 to 4 years are going to be. And so I think that's what we're in for today is just more of that type of a tone setting and making sure that things are laid out and that everybody understands the vision of what the governor has for the state, and for the legislators to be able to interact with him during the course of the day is always an important aspect as well.
The speech that we'll hear, I think, in a few moments to the General Assembly, the joint session, will be maybe a bit less thematic than the one he will deliver from the steps, because he will be challenging in a way the General Assembly. This is directed not only at the audience at home, these ceremonies have been televised now for a number of years, but he will hit the highlights of what he wants to achieve in the General Assembly in the session, which began only yesterday. But he'll be a little bit lofty as well.
I think so. I mean, at the risk of sort of
spiritual, if you will.
Well, and I was going to say, I mean, you know, we have an advanced copy of the speech, and so I know that everyone here is going to get a chance to see it here in a few minutes. But one of the things that struck me as I went through it is more of the speech is really touting the accomplishments of the first term than it is about you know, what he's setting forward in the upcoming session. And what I thought was also interesting is that, you know, while we, I think, already know a lot of the main themes he's going to hit for this session in terms of taxes and government transformation, which is sort of a reorganization of all of the government departments, what we don't see is specificity on the highway plan. And that we know that's sort of a big issue, and I know we talked about it even before we came on air. He sort of has, I think, just one sentence about the highway plan, unless I'm mistaken, having gone through this draft here. So, I mean, for the viewers, I think, you know, we're getting maybe a taste of what's coming, but it's really more about, you know, him talking about what he's accomplished up through this point than it is really, you know, putting us, giving us a roadmap for what's coming.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I don't think anybody is speaking with any specificity about a highway program.
No, and the one thing that I think Governor Hutchinson has demonstrated in his first term in office is his collaborative nature, with the General Assembly and with legislative leaders, and so he knows full well that at the beginning of this session that it's going to be a process, and I think you'll see him allude to that today, but you'll in the weeks to come hear that a lot from him as well. Is that it's a partnership. He knows that that's the dynamic between the executive branch and the legislative branch, is to have these discussions, to work out these details. I think his big challenge in a lot of these today to the General Assembly and to the state will be, let's work together to find a solution for these problems, and identifying those, prioritizing them, and then everybody rolling up their sleeves and getting to work and trying to solve that problem.
Some people view the governor of Arkansas, or the governorship, with a certain amount of awe that I've often found a bit short of reality. You know, the governor is the chief executive of Arkansas, but constitutionally, it is not a terribly powerful office to get anything of any significance done. You have to be clever. You have to have a General Assembly to go along.
Well, and I think
you can hire somebody, you can fire somebody, but to get anything of real substance achieved, you got to have a legislature.
Yes, sir. And I think that by and large, you know, we kind of do that with elected officials in general, as we kind of put them up on a pedestal without kind of realizing these are men and women. They're our neighbors. I mean, in our representative form of government. I mean, it's Warwick and I both we talked at great length over the years at how we were just very humbled that we had the opportunity to serve and to represent the state and our districts. And so there's regular people. Governor Hutchinson is a man that has a job, and he understands that role, and I think he's done a great job in his first 4 years, and I think he now really kind of understands even more on how to create the dynamics that he needs for success in the next term as well.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say, I mean, you know, our system is really designed, you know, in a very much a populist way to make sure that the people really are able, through their elected representatives, to have a say in major policy. And so, you know, anytime you're, you know, looking to increase taxes in any kind of way, you actually have a 3/4 vote requirement in both houses of the legislature. Anytime you're trying to amend any kind of initiated act or make any kind of change at all, it takes a 2/3 vote of each chamber. And so, when it comes to major initiatives, and even, you know, the tax plan that the governor has, because it does adjust aspects of that, and even his government transformation plan, which adjusts, I think, some aspects of initiated acts, you're looking at 3/4 votes or 2/3 votes, not just simple majorities. And so even when you have a situation like we have now, where, you know, we do have one party dominating, which basically for the most of Arkansas history we've had that, which is just a different party over the last several years than it was for the first 138. But, you know, you have a situation where even with huge majorities, 76-24 in the House for the Republicans, what is it, 26-9 in the Senate,
so. Yeah.
you know, he still has to make sure he builds some consensus to get those big votes that he needs to pass his major initiatives.
Three most important things any legislature has to do is budget, budget, and budget. You can't do that until we resolve, it would appear, Mr. Speaker, until we get the tax plan, administration's tax plan hammered out.
I think so. I mean, that's going to be a key component to be able to see
how much money we got.
How much money, especially as they look forward, because I think the governor and his staff and administration, I think, really set a tone in this first term for how they're going to view the moves that they make in the present and what the impacts will be in the future. They don't want to make a move that sounds good and looks good right now, but they know is going to have a negative impact. So he's very prudent and very cautious in that regard. So they're going to want to make sure that they get the tax plan settled so that they can budget appropriately, not only just for the next couple of years, but he's looking 10 years down the road, and as he kind of plays the big picture there.
Yeah.
Well, and the only thing I'd say is, you know, whenever I'm sort of giving people a primer on Arkansas government, you know, you do start with the budget, and you do also have to acknowledge that many of the decisions are almost sort of made ahead of time for different reasons. I mean, you know, the bulk of our spending in the state goes to K through 12 education and to health and human services. And, you know, when it comes to those, you've got, you know, Supreme Court mandates on adequacy for education. When it comes to health and human services, you have a lot of federal programs that are matched. And so once you've sort of taken care of that, and then you've taken care of things like higher ed and prisons, and other obviously basic needs of the state, including highways, you're left with a very, very negligible amount of money that is flexible in essence. And so that's what most of the budget fights end up being over. They end up being over small amounts of money and competing priorities, and people obviously have big ideas, things like universal pre-K for the state or other things they'd like to see the state take on. But when it comes down to it, there's very little money to work with. And then when you are passing tax cuts, that obviously reduces the pool even more, which is sort of the point I was going to get to, which you were talking about, which is you need to deal with the tax cuts first so you know how much money you've got to work with. But in essence, those fights near the end of the session are going to be over probably pretty small amounts of money in the end.
Well, the administration, the governor would seem to have a natural ally in the new president pro tem of the Senate. Both are eager to say, there's a majority, I think, that's ready to go along with tax reduction of one form or another. But largely, it would appear the governor and the pro tem of the Senate are in accord on the major objective. Both is to get the top rate down, under 6, a phase-in. Jeremy, Mr. Speaker, that would, I think DFNA's estimate is about a $200 million reduction in general revenue over when it's finally phased in, anyway.
Yes, sir.
Are these guys, ladies and gentlemen, the executive and the legislative, are they really threading the needle here?
Well, I think when you look at it, especially looking back over the last 10 years, you've seen time and time again that our economy and our budget have been able to absorb, if done appropriately, tax cuts. If they were not thoughtful in how they were executed, then you have a situation maybe like what Kansas found themselves in, but we have steered clear of that. I mean, I can remember my first term in the legislature, Governor Beebe telling us, don't talk about tax cuts, we can't afford them. If they happen, then, we'd have, A, B, and C negative events occur, and but tax cuts were implemented that session, and then we didn't have a doomsday scenario, and so it really, if done appropriately, you can do it and it be okay. So I think in this particular situation here, that's where some of the debate and discussion is still at, is in that desire to be thoughtful, to make sure that they're doing things appropriate. So I don't know that they're going to thread the needle as much as they're making sure that there's not a significant amount of collateral issues that are unforeseen. If they know it's going to come, then they can make adjustments in other areas and make sure that the state's protected.
Oh.
Yeah, and we're fortunate as a state in that we have something called the Revenue Stabilization Act, which allows us to be somewhat flexible in our budgeting. We do budget on a biennial basis, so these sessions are meant to budget for the next 2 years, but as everyone knows, back in the early part of this decade, we started having fiscal sessions in the off years, which allows us to revisit the budget. And then, like I said, in essence, we're on an ongoing basis where we can adjust the budget as necessary. I do worry, though, sometimes that we sort of consider certain issues in a vacuum. So, this tax plan, obviously, the reason why we're trying to get to 5.9% as the top rate is because, the leadership has decided that we don't need to have the highest marginal tax rate in the region among the 6 states that border us. And right now we do, and so we're trying to get below Louisiana, which has the their highest marginal tax rate is 6%. So if we go to 5.9, we can say that we don't have the highest marginal tax rate in the region. But other states that have lower income taxes also have other kinds of taxes, like property taxes, that help them kind of meet their budgetary needs. And we are sometimes playing with fire if we reduce our revenue so much that in the case of a recession or any kind of economic downturn, our basic services as a state are in peril. And I think that's something that happened in Kansas. It's certainly something that even happened in Louisiana, where people might remember the universities there and other basic state services were really in jeopardy for quite a bit. So I don't think it's unreasonable to say that sometimes the ideological arguments behind tax policies don't necessarily comport with the mathematics that you need to support basic state services.
Well, along those lines, gentlemen, it's argued in some quarters that the state is not necessarily investing where it might, depending on one's philosophy, be prudent to do so. For example, higher ed, early childhood education, universal pre-K, for example, Mr. Speaker.
Well,
funding's been flat, pretty much.
It has, and when you've got a state of 3 million individuals, you're going to have a lot of varying opinions as far as what should be the priorities, and that's why we have elections. You campaign, you throw out your vision for the state and what you think those priorities are, and if the electorate agrees with you, then they elect you into those positions to make those decisions. And so and that's kind of where you see the governor, where you see Senate President Hendren, Speaker Shepherd, and all of their discussions and conversations are taking that feedback from around the state, and especially, when you run statewide like the governor has, you get to interact with a tremendous amount of people who get to, tell you if you're doing it right or doing it wrong, and he's able to take that in to consideration as he lays out, his vision for the state, and so I think that's where he's coming into this term, is that he's taking that feedback that he's gotten as far as what those priorities should be. He's trying to figure out how to accommodate as much of the priority list as he can in this session. Which is why I think one of the reasons why we're going to hear about transportation continually over the next few weeks, is he's gotten that feedback that it needs to be something that is dealt with, and he'll work with the General Assembly on that transformation, and the other other ideas that he's been able to interact with the citizens and get those discussions across the state, and we'll see those being his focus over these next 4 years.
Well, certainly with the exception, perhaps, of surface transportation, the prevailing political mood, Warwick Seaman, would not seem to be particularly hospitable to what some would call strategic investment anyway. We're in a period that is eager to see, that is very jaundiced about government, which we'll get into.
Well, and
later.
I'll be candid, I guess, because I can be, not serving an elective office and not having any stake in the game right now.
Free at last.
Pretty much, yeah. So, what I can say is, I think one of the reasons why there's only one sentence in the governor's speech about the highway plan, and why he's going to have to sort of figure out how to maneuver through it, is because of what you just sort of described. You've got the situation that we've already outlined about, limited amount of money available in government. And then the truth is, if you're going to create more money for highways, you need to find it somewhere. And the question is, there's no money that exists, so you need new money, hence that's some kind of raising of taxes or fees in some way. I mean, you have to say those words because that's the only way you get new money into government. And the reason why the legislature hasn't been able to deal with that, even in the 3 terms that I served, was because nobody wanted to be the person to propose it. And so even, even if you were just to refer it to the voters, for instance, there is a certain, group of people that want to punish anyone who would even refer a tax increase or anything that would generate new revenue for the government, punish those people for even sending it to a vote of the people.
Public vote.
So that's going to be, I think, a big issue in this session is, okay, we all know, there's this desire for new money for highways and roads and all of that. Where's it going to come from when you're cutting taxes already? And who's going to be the person willing to say, either I'm going to sponsor this bill to do it through the legislature, or I'm going to sponsor this, initiate act to the voters and allow them to decide it. Those are going to be the critical issues, at least on that particular policy discussion.
Jerry Gilliland, this Grover Norquist sort of element that's out there, then absolutely, positively no tax whatsoever. Is there an alternative? I mean, do you hear that group propose any alternative to highways, streets, county roads that are plainly crumbling? Well,
and you've got kind of pockets within that group, even that mindset. A lot of them will say, well, you're already bringing in enough money, you're just not using it and allocating it appropriately. So that would be more of your general revenue transfer type mindsets. But there are others that will say, well, you can raise it here as long as you lower it somewhere else.
Offset.
And so you get into that, and I think part of the reason that the governor, and I think he will talk longer today when it's actually, when he's in front of the the General Assembly and then out on the steps, I think you'll see probably a little bit more talk on transportation than just a brief mention. But I think one of the reasons that he's kind of pulling back from this a little bit is he doesn't want to kind of predetermine what the discussion is going to be. I think he's looking for general really good input and discussion with stakeholders and the members of the Senate and the House, and he doesn't want to predispose them to a particular line. Well, the governor wants this, so I'll just quit the effort of really trying to figure this out. I think he wants creativity. I think he wants that, which is one of the reasons why he's not getting into specifics at this time too.
Well, and this is not a criticism of the governor. I just want to make that clear. But I think that and again, maybe he will, veer from the text or add to it. But what you don't see is him making a case even for any here are the needs, here are the problems, here's why we have to address this issue, and I call upon you, the House and Senate, to help us deal with this issue once and for all, instead of kicking the can down the road for another 2 years. And so, again, it makes you wonder, how much fight is there going to be on this issue? And it may be, again, that, there is a interest in using existing funds for it. I think the problem there is, and again, this is important for viewers to know, is that highway funding never comes from general revenue, typically.
Right.
Typically, right. I mean, that's usually protected. And the reason why also is because highways are governed differently. I mean, you have an independent highway commission, and that was via a constitutional amendment that was passed in the 1950s because there was corruption when it came to highway funding in the legislature. So the correction on that was to remove, in essence, the politics from highway funding and give it to an appointed commission. Now, one could argue, 60 years later, there's politics involved in an independent and appointed highway commission too. And perhaps, having elected officials involved, could maybe result in some better decision making and not so much distance from it. But anyway, you've got this situation where general revenue is really not in play, and were it to come into play, and this happened while we were in the legislature. Yes. Every time there was sort of an effort made to dip into that pool, and it ultimately was repelled because then you're really opening up a huge can of worms when you do that.
Has the administration, Mr. Speaker, already opened that can of worms?
I think to some extent.
It took some general revenue money early on in the administration to take advantage of some federal matching funds that would have stayed on the table otherwise.
I believe that when it comes to discretionary or rainy day options or that you've got at the end when you have the revenue stabilization talks, I think there's some willingness there among leadership in the legislature and with the governor to have that discussion if necessary. I think he's been pretty clear over the last several months and years that he does not favor a general revenue transfer reallocation of funds as option A, of dealing with highways. And I think in the campaign, he articulated himself quite often that he would prefer that the voters decide the plan and a good chunk of the plan on how they're going to handle it. And so I think that's one of the reasons too. He may already kind of feel like, hey, I've gone over this, I've talked about it quite a bit, I spent months on the campaign trail saying this is what I think we ought to do. So it may be why, he might not focus on it a lot today, is that he kind of feels like, hey, I've covered this territory before. But I think he's going to try to probably steer clear of a straight general revenue transfer in the session, just based on what he has been saying over the last year in particular.
If the legislature has almost, I can't think of an instance when it hasn't deferred to the governor in the end analysis, it has not deferred to the governor on tax policy. If the administration is against it, it's probably not going to go anywhere. Do you see that attitude changing?
Not really.
Yeah.
That's, at the end of the day,
he's the one who has to make the budget work after the session's over.
He does, and he's the one that is responsible for it. But there's also an attitude, and I heard this a lot from the time I came in under Governor Beebe and my time with Governor Hutchinson. A lot of members will kind of do the math, and okay, I have 30,000 constituents as a representative, or if I'm a senator, I've got 90,000 plus. He was elected statewide. I was elected in one part of my state. He was elected statewide. And at the end of the day, that carries a lot of weight as far as his voice in the process.
I can just tell you from experience, because in the last session, I did have a competing tax proposal with the governor, and I had the chance to make my case. I mean, to your point, we're all elected, and this system is designed to allow ideas to be debated, and I had my chance. But most people went with what the governor had proposed, and I think it's because there is a lot of difference there. And just in full disclosure, it was an earned income tax credit, proposal that sort of was meant to sort of be a different alternative to how we deliver tax relief to lower and middle income Arkansans. But I again feel good about the process, had my chance, and fell short. But I was going to bring up one other issue, because I know we're getting close to his speech, but I think one really interesting thing about going into this session here in 2019 is that in the 3 terms that I served, in 2013, 2015, 2017, the dominant issue was related to health care and the Medicaid expansion, mainly because we were dealing with, the Affordable Care Act, or what people refer to as Obamacare, and how we implemented that here. You had the private option when Governor Beebe was still in office, became Arkansas Works after Governor Hutchinson took office, and so much kind of was riding on that, because you couldn't really balance the budget till you knew how you were spending those Medicaid dollars. And it was always really, down to the wire, passing those things by 1 vote or whatever it is. So it really dominated the session. That doesn't seem like that's going to be the case this year, which is, I think, a pretty big deal, a big difference after the last 6 years of really, sort of turmoil and heartache.
Every year.
I mean, you just didn't know. I mean, and again, you probably were deeper in the thick of it than I was. So.
I think the members are probably, at this point, looking forward to having some other policy discussions, because many of them ran on other things besides that. And so I think for them it'll be a welcomed breath of fresh air to be able to work on transformation and transportation and taxes and some of these other issues. And I think a large part of that is that they've been in the trenches, they've already fought those battles, and they've had those discussions, and they kind of feel like that we're in a place that's workable. Maybe there's several that might still feel like we're not in the ideal place on both sides of the spectrum politically, but it's some place that's workable, and that we can move forward and move on to some of these other issues that are important and need to be addressed.
I think it was a couple of years ago, and I think I'm quoting him correctly, Mr. Hutchinson himself said, look, the Affordable Care Act, under whatever name you wish to call it, is what is now woven into the fabric of governance in Arkansas, certainly the budget process. And the idea of withdrawing from that expansion would just produce chaos, fiscal chaos. So we need to deal with it. I mean, you want to tinker around the edges, as the administration does. I don't want to belittle or diminish the impact that whatever changes might be affected would have. But it's there.
It is, and I think you see, the healthcare system in Arkansas, has really, to your point earlier, kind of woven all of this into their operating models, and so any changes to it, whether they're severe or minor in their intent, will have an impact and need to be handled appropriately. And I think to your point earlier, it's after years of having those discussions and everything, I think a lot of folks kind of feel like that maybe we're kind of closer to reaching a balance necessary to be able to move on from that topic and deal with some of these other issues.
Although, there's still the caveat also that, we had imposed a work requirement most recently on that, and that's right now being challenged in federal court, and were that to be overturned, then obviously, we would have to come back. And part of the reason why the work requirement was passed here was as a compromise for folks who don't really like everything about the Medicaid expansion to begin with, and wanted, more restrictions on it, and therefore, in order to get their vote, you kind of had to have the work requirement and a few of these other things that have kind of tied the system down a little bit. And so it would create a little bit of consternation, I would think, if the work requirement's overturned and they have to come back and again reauthorize this with, again, a 3/4 vote. That's why it's always so hard to get, because it's a budget type situation. And you know, you just never know how that's going to turn out.
Well, we also have just looking at it from the outside, a Senate that might be a bit more, interestingly, the early battles were in the House over the Affordable Care Act were in the House, and then in the last couple of sessions it shifted to the Senate. To your relief.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so. And then now you've got several House members who are in the Senate that have
pretty conservative members
and
too.
Gone down, and so it will be a different conversation because you have a few different members in the Senate now. But I think that it would be a similar conversation. I don't think it would be drastically different. I think some of the faces and names have definitely changed, but I think the thoughtfulness and concern over the program and how it's implemented would still be there, and so there. I think Warwick's totally right, though. I think if that court decision came down while they were in session, it would change the tone and tenor and the flow of the session for sure. But with the courts, you know, you never can tell when they'll get around to making their decision and what it will be. So I think they'll chart the course on what they know and that they have to deal with, and they'll take that up if it comes their way.
Tone and tenor, it might change. Would it change the outcome? Is that a real threat, possibility?
I mean, anything's possible. I mean, I just say that having gone through this again, you know, quite frankly, actually, pretty much 6 times. Because if you think about it, it also comes up in the fiscal session.
Yeah, that's
so,
true, yes.
You know, it got to be a little bit like Groundhog Day, you know, dealing with this fight. And you know, people use it as leverage to get what they want to.
Yeah.
Not people like me who were in the minority, but other folks. So, you know, what you have in essence is a situation where, I mean, anything could happen. If somebody sees an opportunity, if somebody feels like, you know, the system isn't set up the way they think it ought to be, then it you know, throws things into chaos. And what's interesting is, again, we talked about the supermajorities in the House and Senate, you know, which are you know, big for the Republicans, but that doesn't necessarily mean the governor gets everything he wants. I mean, I think that it, you know, creates a situation where you know, you have different factions of the Republican Party. It puts, you know, the Democrats in a position to, you know, sometimes extract concessions for what they want if they can, you know, help create the majority that the governor needs to get something done. So all of this is very tactical, and it happens in an environment that's pretty chaotic, because the other thing everyone should know is, you know, a legislative session starts like it does this week, and everybody is really happy, and everything's really calm, and everyone's excited to be there, and there's a lot of pomp and circumstance, and then the roller coaster gets to the top and starts going down, and it goes fast and furious until you get to the end of the session for 90 days. And
time's running out.
It goes faster than you could ever imagine.
But I will say this, though. I think that the governor's his model of interaction with the General Assembly, with the stakeholders in every area, I think that collaborative mindset that he has will position him for success if, you know, the Arkansas Works comes back up, if you know, some of these other issues, you know, do get kind of thorny and then do drag on to where maybe not everybody's getting along as easily as they were this week. I think the way that he has kind of set up this dynamic will give him a greater chance of success. It's not a guaranteed by any stretch of the means, and you've got 135 elected members of the General Assembly that have their own, you know, geographic needs, demographic needs, you know, partisan makeup, those kind of things come into play. But I think the way that he goes about things sets himself up for the greatest opportunity for success.
Warwick Sabin mentioned a moment ago that what, about 6-8 years ago now, the partisan composition of the General Assembly changed significantly after 120 years of solid Democratic rule in the House and Senate. The loyal opposition took over and is now in the majority, and has been for, what, 4 sessions now. And yet, whenever I go to, whenever I'm at the Capitol at a legislative meeting, one is always struck by how the collegiality has still, by and large, remained. It's not, it's very personal.
It is, and I think
relationships matter.
And I think that's the key, is that you get to know each other, you know, as men and women, you know, husbands, fathers, you know, and you get to know about their families, and you develop relationships that cross party lines, and you know, you go to dinner, you know, with your colleagues, but then also a lot of times you go with when their spouses are around, and you know, and Warwick and I have been good friends for many years, and you know, we're in different parties, and you see past all that to the real people that you're working with, and I think it's a great testament to the Arkansas political culture that has been maintained even through the party switch, and I hope it stays that way. I hope people do interact, and I think that's one of the key components of being able to socialize afterwards, go to dinner, go to lunches together. I think that helps draw everybody together and keep this as cordial as it is.
I think the speaker's right. I also think that it's a testament to the kind of system we have in Arkansas, because it's a part-time legislature.
Yes.
And, you know, I always talk to folks about the fact that having participated in it, I think I'm even more convinced that it's the best way to do government, because it keeps you connected to real life. I mean, unless you're retired or independently wealthy, you know, you have a real job. You have to obviously leave it for a few hours a day. And in my case, you know, I was fortunate because I live in Little Rock, so I could literally keep my job and go do the sessions at the same time. But, you know, it's easy to get into trouble at the Capitol, and I know, you know, there's a lot of talk about ethics and all of the, obviously, the corruption scandals that have happened in the legislature. But the trouble I'm talking about is just, you know, if people spend too much time in the Capitol, I think they become convinced that the whole world revolves around it, and that it's their job to come up with every solution to every problem, and it's just a lot of mischief making. And I think the idea of being able to stay busy, to be connected to real people, to go home, and live a real life, as opposed to being, you know, a full-time legislator, is the key to being able to have collegiality, to treat this as, you know, what the founders, I think, intended, which is to be, you know, a citizen legislator.
What you're seeing now, ladies and gentlemen, is a presentation of the colors. If I can see my monitor correctly anyway, we're on the floor of the House of Representatives now, our camera, and we have, again, the presentation of the colors. Mr. Hutchinson, expected any moment now. There will be a delegation, as always, to escort the governor into the chamber. And shortly thereafter, we will hear his address to the General Assembly. Again, we expect it to be a bit thematic, but also programmatic as well. As always, the governor, or as always, key elements of the governor's program anyway, certainly his objectives were known well in advance.
You may be seated.
Of the session. And we have Speaker Shepherd and Leader Hendren, or President Hendren, I think, up on the dais now.
At this time, the chair recognizes a number of dignitaries, and we have with us the Arkansas Supreme Court Chief Justice, John Dan Kemp, the Associate Justices of the Arkansas Supreme Court, the Honorable Karen Baker, the Honorable Courtney Goodson, the Honorable Joe Hart, the Honorable Rhonda Wood, the Honorable Robin Wynn, and the Honorable Sean Womack. Additionally, we have the following constitutional officers with us: Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin, Secretary of State John Thurston, Treasurer of State Dennis Milligan, Auditor of State Andrea Lee, Attorney General Leslie Rutledge, Commissioner of State Lands Tommy Land. Our doctor of the day is Dr. Teresa Bow of Little Rock, and Dr. Scott Ferguson of West Memphis, who is Representative Deborah Ferguson's husband. Let's give them all a hand. I also failed to mention that the nurse of the day is Brenda Hewitt, and we also have the following. We're aware that we have the following members of the former members of the General Assembly: former Representative Jonathan Barnett, former Representative Ann Clemmer, former Representative Alan Kerr, and former Representative Duncan Baird. At this time, I recognize the House parliamentarian, Finest Buddy Johnson, to announce the results of the general election vote for the United States Congress, proposed constitutional amendments, and ballot issues. Mr. Parliamentarian, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For United States Congress, District Number 1, Congressman Rick Crawford, Republican, 138,757 votes. Shinton Desai, Democrat, 57,908 votes. Elvis Presley, Libertarian, 4,581 votes. United States Congress, District Number 2, Congressman French Hill, Republican, 132,125 votes. Clark Tucker, Democrat, 116,135 votes. Joe Ryan Swafford, Libertarian, 5,193 votes. United States Congress, District Number 3, Congressman Steve Womack, 148,717 votes. Josh Mahoney, Democrat, 74,952 votes. Michael J. Kalagas, Libertarian, 5,899 votes. And write-in, 140 votes. United States Congress, District Number 4, Representative Bruce Westerman, 136,750 votes. Hayden Catherine Shamel, 64,009 votes. Tom Canada, Libertarian, 3,952 votes. Write-in, 216 votes. Ballot issue number 2, a constitutional amendment adding as a qualification to vote that a voter present certain valid photographic identification when casting a ballot in person or casting an absentee ballot. For 692,646 votes. Against 178,946 votes. Issue number 4, an amendment to require 4 licenses to be issued for casino gaming.
And if you haven't guessed it at home, what we're doing here is enduring, if you will, a bit of ceremony, a bit of ritual, a bit of housekeeping, if you will, before Mr. Hutchinson takes the podium or is escorted to the chamber. Again, we've seen this before. We've been here before.
Yes, it's you know, one of those. The first time you go through it and you're in the chamber, you're just in awe, you know, because you're day 2 of your life as a legislator, and you know, by the time you get to your 3rd and 4th terms, it's routine. You know, that it's just a part of the process, and I can remember the differences each time on how I reacted and interacted with the process there. And but for those new members that just got sworn in yesterday, it's their freshman term, whether they're brand new to the Senate or brand new to the House, this is an extremely exciting day for them to be able to be a part of this, and I'm proud for them and the opportunity they have to serve their districts and be a part of this process.
And this is more important than it seems to. I think sometimes we don't appreciate the sort of wisdom of the founders when they set all this stuff up for us, because it's important to set the tone that you're part of something bigger than yourself, that, you know, this is an institution that you're upholding. Just even hearing, you know, the results of the election, making sure that people understand, you know, that we have a democratic process, and that it's important to have transparency and to involve everybody in the decision making. All of these things, again, hopefully set the tone for people to understand that, you know, you have a duty to the people. You're, you know, if you're in the House, you're representing 33,000 people in your district, and hopefully you're sort of leaving, you know, some of the more petty and unimportant things behind, so you can focus on, you know, these issues for the betterment of our state, and that's what all of this really is all about.
I would suggest too that we mentioned since Buddy Johnson, who was the House parliamentarian, had the well there for just a moment. So much institutional memory is vested in the House staff, which Buddy's predecessor as parliamentarian, Tim Massinelli, who passed away sadly just a couple of years ago. Tim had been in that position for heaven only knows how long. And Buddy has been on the key member of the staff, Buddy Johnson, a key member of the staff for, I think, decades now, gentlemen. And he and others of
Secretary of State,
the staff have kept that institution running. Same on the Senate side. Ann Cornwell, you know, the Senate Secretary. I mean, they make the joint work, frankly.
Well, and in being a nonpartisan staff, I think, is extremely important, not only in preserving that institutional knowledge and being able to go from, you know, administration term to term, so to speak, but in just how that they interact with the members. It also, to our discussion previously and earlier, really helps with the interactions of the members with other members. You know, it sets that tone, and that we're here to work, we're here to do the people's business, we're going to, you know, work together and be partners in this process. And having the privilege of having worked very closely with the House staff, tremendous, you know, just character and quality of the men and women that serve in those roles, and same with the Senate, with Steve and Ann and Sabrina and the crew there too. Just really good people, and they're really fantastic to work with. It was an honor to be able to be with them, and for those 8 years for me.
Well, and we were talking earlier about, you know, the fact that we have a part-time legislature here in Arkansas and how unique that's become around the country. The other thing I think is nice to reassure Arkansas taxpayers is I can tell you that when it comes to staffing, it's pretty minimal. You know, when I talk to legislators in other states around the country, most of them have their own staff assigned to them individually. Sometimes they have multiple staff people, almost like a member of Congress. Mm-hmm. Arkansas, I think, is unique in that, you know, we don't have that, and we have a small sort of staff for the House that serves all 100 members, for instance, and it's the same on the Senate side. And they do incredible work. I mean, they really do, and same with the Bureau of Legislative Research. And I would have to say that relative to other states, it's pretty darn efficient, because, you know, as a citizen legislator, you're doing a lot of your own constituent service, but then relying upon, you know, the staff to really guide you through the process, especially when you're new to it.
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, some staff, well, we're seeing
they're swearing in the constitutional officers?
Yeah, we're seeing the constitutional officers, but my monitor's a bit distant, and my eyes are fading in my old age, so I really couldn't see who was taking the oath.
Treasurer Milligan
at that point. But at any rate, yeah, these constitutional officers will be administered the oath prior to Mr. Hutchinson coming in. Is he a lame duck? Will he, to what extent is a governor who still has 4 years to serve, is just beginning that, to what extent does he lose his powers, if any, his influence, if any?
Well, I think you've got a natural, you know, cycle there in not having another term. You know, people can start to look at things in a finite way. I think where and I think Governor Beebe exemplified this as well, the knowledge and experience you gain in your first term will help you counteract any of those effects, because you are, you know, a more fine-tuned machine, so to speak, and that's how your administration works. But your knowledge base has increased significantly from your first term to second term, and so I think Governor Hutchinson will be just like Governor Beebe in that regard, and the fact that I think any kind of loss of ability to work because you do have that finite end, I think will be compensated and maybe even more to his benefit, with just the simple fact that he's had a first term under his belt, and he'll be more adept in dealing with some of those challenges, personalities as well.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I was just going to say, I think he's at the very pinnacle of his power and influence right now, because as the Speaker mentioned, you know, he's got a full term under his belt. He's been through 2 sessions already. He just got reelected, and pretty significant margin at that. And this is his chance to really drive an agenda as hard as he wants to drive it. And I think the knowledge is, and this is to your point, the lame duck thing, I think, starts in the next session 2 years from now, where he's kind of coming down, you know, at the end, and people are starting to think about who the next governor is going to be. So this 2019 session is really Governor Hutchinson's chance, I think, to cement his legacy and do what he wants to do.
Rumor is there's some candidates for governor in that chamber, even as we speak.
I'm sure.
There always are.
Yeah.
I think one thing, too, that works for the benefit of a governor in their second term is that not having a re-election on the horizon frees them up to maybe be bold take some chances and tackle some issues that otherwise might not be tackled. And so I think you'll see that too, especially going to that last session. His last 2 years in office, I think you'll see that come about as well.
And I'll make a real wonky kind of point, but it's something I've thought about a lot, which is that I really feel like a governor, if he or she's lucky enough to have 2 terms, really only has 2 sessions where they can be super effective. And that's the second session of the first term and the first session of their second term. Because our system is so crazy in that you get elected governor, and then, not even 2 months later, you're already starting a legislative session. So you have to get your staff, and your staff doesn't know any of the legislators. You have to have a legislative agenda all ready to go coming off an election. Everything's brand new. So in essence, you're just sort of hanging on for dear life that first session. And I remember that because Governor Hutchinson's first session was my second term. And I remember thinking, well, this is kind of like a giveaway session because you don't have time to really set up the issues you want to set up or make the relationships you want to make and really get anything done. And I felt worse for the governor because it's sort of like you only have 4 sessions to really do something, and you're kind of having to give away the first one just to kind of get acclimated to the whole process. So I kind of wish our legislative sessions were timed so that the governor maybe has a year under his or her belt to really prepare for it. I think that would do the state a lot more good.
And we've kind of touched on this before, but certainly a chamber leader and a caucus leader, as well as the governor, you have to know it helps to know your members, what the gentleman or the gentlewoman from, say, Sharp County or Calhoun County, what are their interests? What do they need? What does he or she need? Why did they come to the Capitol?
Well, and you want to be able to know what their passions are, so that you can work with them, because, and Speaker Shepherd said this yesterday, and I think Senate President Hendren did too, in some of their remarks, that you want to create that environment for success for the membership. And the governor and an executive branch has the same, and the governor has the same ideas. And I want to be able to help them be successful, because if they're successful, the state's successful. You want that partnership, and so you need to be able to know what they want to accomplish, and so it is tough, to Work's point, to come right in and be able to learn everybody and be able to interact with them at a level that would be beneficial for them and for the state. But I think that unless they make a change, to the Constitution, this is what we've got, and they ramp up and do the best they can in that short window coming around. I think that's one of the strong advantages Governor Hutchinson has going into this second term, is that he has spent a lot of time in his first term getting to know the members, having them to his house for functions, going to their functions, interacting, having them in his office, really trying to get to know them as people, learn, what their hopes are, for their legislative sessions or the constituent issues, things like that. So he's got a pretty good base of knowledge there with those members. He's been reaching out since the election to the new members, the incoming members, and trying to make sure that he developed a good rapport with them too, and that will serve him extremely well these next 4 years.
What is important to them includes what can also be dangerous to them at home, politically.
Yes.
With their constituency.
Mm-hmm. Well, and he traveled, and I've alluded to this earlier. I mean, his travel schedule as governor and on the campaign trail has taken him all around the state, and so he's got a good sense of and gotten feedback in their districts as well, and he could share that, and say, well, when I was there, at the Tomato Festival or whatever function it might have been, or if he was at the high school discussing his coding initiative, he gets feedback, and he could share that and say, this is what I heard, is that what you're hearing? And it's, again, it's a very collaborative process that he likes to employ when possible.
Oh. And there we have it. The Honorable Asa Hutchinson about to accept her second term as governor.
Good to be with you, dear, isn't it?
The House parliamentarian Buddy Johnson is recognized for the declaration of the results of the general election vote for the office of governor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Office of Governor. Asa Hutchinson, Republican, 584,424 votes. Jared K. Henderson, Democrat, 283,236 votes. Mark West, Libertarian, 25,885 votes.
I, Asa Hutchinson,
do solemnly swear
that
I will support the Constitution of the United States
I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Arkansas,
and the Constitution of the State of Arkansas,
and that I will faithfully perform the duties
and that I will faithfully perform the duties
of the office of Governor for the State of Arkansas,
of the office of Governor of the State of Arkansas,
the official position upon which I'm about to enter. So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Honorable Asa Hutchinson, Governor of the State of Arkansas.
Thank you. Thank you. Lieutenant Governor Griffin, Speaker Shepard, President Hendren, Mr. Chief Justice, and honored members of the General Assembly. This is truly an occasion to celebrate. You are celebrating, we are celebrating, it's exciting. But it is also a time to reflect and to set a determined course for the future. As part of the celebration, I have my family here today. My wife, Susan, my son, Asa III, Sarah and Dave, my daughter and son-in-law, John Paul and Nubia, my son, and there they are, and then young Seth and Julia. Thank you for being here and a part of this. And then I have 4 grandchildren here today, Elabeth, Malcolm, Isabella, and John Pablo. Maybe John Pablo took a leave of absence because he's young. But it is a certain privilege, a special privilege to have my family here who have been along this journey with me, and it's important for them to share in this important occasion. As we convene today to begin a new term in office, we can rejoice that the election is over. The seasons have changed, and we are now entering the winter of hard work. As we do so, we are reminded that the true purpose of political victory is service. A simple but profound phrase: we serve the public. Not a party, not personal interest, we serve the public. Some of you may not be aware. You've been in my office, but maybe you have come directly to visit with me. But if you go in the door of my office and you look left, you will see a box. It is a shoe shine kit. And it is in my office, and it says, there's a plaque on there that says, "This is to remind you of your youth in Gravette." Because it was in Gravette that I shine shoes at Johnny's Barber Shop as my first job. I shined shoes for 25 cents on shoes and 50 cents for boots because they were muddy. I have that in my office because it reminds me of my roots, and it reminds me of the dignity of work. And so, members of the General Assembly, during the session, come on by the governor's office and get your shoes shined. Now, as we consider the upcoming session, we also realize very quickly that there is nothing that we can do alone. It takes all of us working together for the people of Arkansas. And if we toil well and together, then this spring we will be able to see the first fruits of our labor. And in due time, we will enjoy the full harvest when good policy strengthens public confidence, and when good policy builds hope, and when good policy serves the cause of justice. Today, as is our custom, but it is very important, we began this new leadership with a prayer service at the Mosaic Templars Cultural Center. And justice was one of the themes of that ceremony. Later, we'll go out to the public inaugural ceremony, and we will have our poet laureate, Joe McDougall, read a poem that I commissioned on the theme of hope in Arkansas. And I believe that we will all agree today that Arkansas is an amazing place to live, raise a family, and build our own special future. It hasn't always been easy. Arkansans have had our share of challenge and difficulty. The most challenging time was during the Great Depression. During that time, we were poor, but we did not lose population. Our population did not decline. People stayed here because poverty was all over the nation. That was the 1930s. But when the economy boomed again after the war, the jobs out of state offered better pay. Between 1940 and 1960, over 150,000 people left our state. Some of our best left for Michigan, California, and Chicago. And now the trend is reversed. People are moving to Arkansas from California, Michigan, and Illinois, and we are retaining our homegrown talent. Our population is now over 3 million people and growing every day. The lesson is that if people follow opportunity and pursue quality of life, they're going to come to Arkansas. We have it all here. That is why we work hard to be competitive in our tax rates, to compete for industry and businesses located in this state, to build a technology sector, to expand tourism, and to improve access to the arts and to education. As evidence of these new opportunities, we have moved more than 65,000 Arkansans over the last 4 years out of poverty and into work. They have jobs and they're making more money. And fewer Arkansans are on Medicaid, and fewer are having to rely upon the important safety net of SNAP and other benefits. It's because they have more opportunity. And we have proven that we can lead in entrepreneurship, agriculture, global retail trade, and technology education. Before we forge into the future today, it is important to note what we have accomplished together. Together, we have reformed our child welfare system. 3 years ago, you approved $24 million additional funding for our child welfare programs, and the result is a 30% increase in foster beds. The result is 22% increase in caseworkers. The result is nearly 1,000 fewer children in foster care. We initiated the Restore Hope Summit, where our faith-based leaders and government partners figured out ways to work together. Thank you for making a difference for our children. Together, we have reformed our criminal justice system, and the result is that the growth of our prison population has been reduced. 4 years ago, we were growing at the rate of 3% per year in our prison population. The growth rate has been reduced to 1% per year. We have invested more in reentry centers to give people a second chance in life. More than 1,200 inmates have graduated through our reentry facilities, and this results in a lower incarceration rate, more people working, and a reduced burden on our taxpayers. We want to give people a second chance in life after they have paid the penalty for any wrongdoing. And I am proud of our employers who give them a chance. One illustration is Stephen Edwards. He's an example of a person who got a second chance and is succeeding. Stephen was convicted of first-degree murder at the age of 16. He spent nearly 20 years in prison. During that time, he got his GED, he earned a diploma from Ozarka College, he earned a bachelor's degree through correspondence from Ohio University. Stephen became the first inmate in our correction system to accomplish those educational goals while incarcerated. The parole board gave Stephen a second chance and reduced his sentence. He moved to Marion, where his first job out of prison was at an eye care clinic. A patient heard his story and hired him to teach GED classes at the Juvenile Center in West Memphis. Then he started a lawn care company with 2 push mowers from Walmart. Now he has 80 clients, owns his own home, pays taxes, and tells his story at teen summits. Stephen Edwards got a second chance. We need to give everyone who is willing to change and contribute that second chance in life. 4 years ago, we had a scholarship lottery that was declining each year in the amount of scholarships for our students. We transformed the lottery from an independent agency into part of the Department of Finance. The result is that we have cut the administrative costs, and the lottery student scholarships have grown by 26%. They have increased from $72 million in 2015 to over $91 million this last year. That's effective government work that we did together. We had an off-course, behind schedule, and discredited effort to put high-speed internet in our schools. We didn't let it ride. We changed courses and built the Arkansas Public School Computer Network. At that time, we became one of only 6 states in the country to fully deploy the highest broadband internet to every school in our state. Together, we have lowered taxes for everyone making less than $75,000 in this state, and we have recruited industry to this state, from Sig Sauer in Jacksonville to Envirotech in Helena, West Helena, to Glatfelter in Fort Smith, to Conifex in El Dorado and Glenwood, with hundreds more businesses moving here or expanding in our state. Together, we have invested in technology education, and as a result, we lead the nation in computer science education of our students. It started with an idea, a modest investment, and legislative support. It now sets an example for states from California to North Carolina. Together, we have invested in pre-K education. Our budget for pre-K has increased from $111 million to $114 million in recent years. We rank 17th nationally in spending on pre-K and number 18 in 4-year-old pre-K access, and we rank number 5 in the nation in terms of 3-year access to early education. Always more to do, but that's a good start. Together, we have cut the size and inefficiency of government. We have worked with you to cut the red tape. We repealed over 800 outdated and unnecessary regulations, which make state government less burdensome to taxpayers and to businesses. We have reduced the size of the executive branch of state government by more than 1,400 employees. That is a reduction of over 5%. This is through improved management practices and attrition, but we can do more. Together, we have transformed a wasteful healthcare system to make sure our healthcare assistance is available to those who need it most. Think about the abuse of preferred family health care, which sucked tens of millions of dollars out of Medicaid into the hands of executives, all at the cost of our developmentally disabled population. It has not been easy, but together we have changed the rules to reduce waste and the potential for abuse in Medicaid payments. And when it comes to the disability waiting list, we did something about it. And for the first time in decades, we provided help to those families and created a way to reduce the waiting list further. This helps families and maximizes the lives of those with disabilities. 1 year ago, I stood in this chamber and I reported to you on the story of Wendy and Wade Reeves and their daughter Reagan. Today, I want to give you an update. As you remember, Reagan was one of the more than 3,000 on the disability waiting list, hoping for services to improve their lives. She had been on the list for 8 years. Then we together allowed $8.5 million every year for those in need of services. Reagan was off the list and got the help she needed. And now the mom, Wendy, reports that she has been able to get a full-time job for the first time since Reagan was born. And Reagan is learning new skills with the help of the waiver worker. Wendy reports that the first time Reagan learned to wash her hair by herself was a big day. What we do in these chambers and in public service makes a difference in the lives of people. Together, we have changed our state budget from one that spends it all to one that creates savings for more difficult times. We now have the long-term reserve fund. The current balance is over $125 million. So when it comes to the future, we have an understanding from history that our future is brightest when we embrace the new and we create growth. Remember, the voters supported and gave us approval for a growth agenda. We cannot let them down. Let's not let this moment in history pass us by, but let us work together for success. Let's work together and make history by reversing the trend of high taxes in Arkansas. Let's make history by transforming state government. Let's make history by raising teacher pay to historic levels in our state. And let's make history by focusing on a growth agenda that allows Arkansans to prosper. I have submitted my balanced budget to you, and it includes additional funding for public safety with 30 additional probation and parole officers. It also includes $2.3 million for an increase of 24 new troopers over the next 2 years. The Arkansas State Police is our top law enforcement agency, and we must support our law enforcement. And Arkansas does. Recently, Corporal Clayton McWilliams was severely injured in the line of duty. The citizens of Ashdown had a fundraiser to support Corporal McWilliams, and more than 500 attended and raised over $50,000. Well done, Ashdown. The budget includes $60 million allocated for raising the minimum teacher pay by $4,000 over the next 4 years. And recognizing that agriculture is our state's #1 industry, my budget includes a much-needed increase in funding of $1.1 million for the Division of Agriculture. And it includes $1.5 million increase in budget for the University of Arkansas at Medical Sciences. Our proposed budget includes sufficient funding for programs that provide a critical safety net for our citizens. And that is why it is important to continue funding at $2.5 million a year our crisis stabilization units, the CSUs. The CSUs provide a treatment option for those suffering from mental illness rather than incarceration or just simply ignoring their needs. As you know, we have dramatically increased our numbers in computer science courses across the state. Last school year, we were at about 6,000, and this year we have more than 8,000 students in high school taking computer coding. That is a 30% increase. And one of the key results of this initiative is that more technology companies are locating in Arkansas or being created here. One of my goals for Arkansas is to be a hub of technology companies that will provide new opportunity and diversity to our economy. For that reason, I'm calling for the creation of a private sector technology and innovation council. This Innovation Council will bring industry leaders and technology entrepreneurs together to create new energy and support for tomorrow's problem solvers and thought leaders in software design, cybersecurity, data analytics, blockchain technology, and all those other things that you're experts in. When it comes to our goals for the future, to me it comes down to a growth agenda. I know I talk about that a lot, but it's a plan for Arkansas that includes more and better paying jobs, increased attainment levels in higher education, a strong, diversified economy, and competitive tax rates. That is why the third phase of tax cuts is planned for this session. 4 years ago, I signed into law the tax cut for the middle income category. This reduced tax rates for those making between $20,000 and $75,000 per year. In 2017, we came together and passed the second phase of our overall tax cut plan with a $50 million reduction for lower income Arkansans. This includes those making less than $20,000 per year. At this point, 90% of all Arkansas taxpayers have received a tax cut, but we have more to accomplish. I applaud the work and recommendations of the Legislative Task Force that worked for 2 years in analyzing and making recommendations. And while I wanted to simply flatten the rate for all taxpayers to 5.9% over the next 4 years, the task force wisely said we should also simplify the rate structure and to raise the standard deduction for taxpayers. The result is a plan that we call the 2-4 5.9 plan. It will set Arkansas on a path to be competitive with our surrounding states, to attract new investments and talent in our state, and to continue our vigorous economic growth. We will work with you to make sure that this plan reduces taxes and that we will hold everyone harmless so that no taxpayer will see any tax increase. For those who think we need to do more, I remind you that the 2.4 5.9 plan reduces revenue by $47.4 million in the first year. But everyone should also note that in the same year, we will be reducing the grocery tax by $61 million, and then the low income tax goes into effect. That's $50 million. And so the total tax reductions will be around $158 million. Now, for those who are concerned about the tax cuts and meeting the other needs of our state, please note that in the last 4 years, we have cut taxes carefully. And we have continued to invest in education, in prisons, public safety, and even funding expanded Medicaid in this state. And we have set aside during that same time over $125 million in savings. Those commitments remain. Carefulness, commitment, meeting our obligations in education and services. But let's not take our eye off the ball in the importance of competitive tax rates in this state. Today, we have a budget that allows for tax cuts while investing in the future. We have demonstrated we can do it, and we will do it again. And as we think about the last 4 years and look forward to what the future holds, it is more than fitting that we recognize those who serve our state and nation in the Arkansas National Guard and our military branches. Without their leadership and service, we could not get the job done in terms of security and services in times of natural disaster in our state. Thank you, men and women, for your service. 32 years ago, I had the opportunity to meet with President Ronald Reagan in the Oval Office. It was my first time in the White House, so I was trying to memorize everything about it. As I was in the Oval Office, I noticed on the President's desk 2 mottos. They caught my attention. One was, "It is amazing what can be accomplished when you don't care who gets the credit." The other motto was a simple phrase, "It can be done." And so when I think about how hard it is to transform government, we need to remind ourselves, it can be done. When I worry about reaching agreement on a new highway funding plan, let's remind ourselves, it can be done. And when we ponder the requirement of a 3/4 vote for lowering and simplifying our income tax rates in Arkansas, let's remind ourselves, it can be done. When I look at the need to raise minimum teacher pay in Arkansas, we know that it can be done and it must be done. Let me add one phrase as I conclude today's remarks. One phrase to the President's desk motto, and that is, together it can be done. Thank you, and may God bless this General Assembly, the work ahead, and the people of this great state. Thank you.
Governor Asa Hutchinson, having taken the oath of office for his second 4-year term and delivering an address to a joint session of the Arkansas General Assembly, 135 members, constitutional officers, the Supreme Court, and of course guests. Gentlemen, former Representative Warwick Sabin, former Speaker Jeremy Gillum, still with us here in the studio. And gentlemen, if we knew pretty much what the governor was going to say before he took the podium today. The word highway was uttered, I believe, by the governor exactly one time. And that's not a criticism of the governor, it just reflects the overall vagueness of exactly where we stand on this transportation issue.
Well, and before we watched the speech, we did have an advanced copy of it, and we talked about this in the earlier coverage, that you know, that was notable in that he, you know, was only leaving one sentence to discuss that issue, but it does indicate that there's quite a bit of work to do to arrive at a solution. You know, the governor has an agenda when it comes to cutting taxes, when it comes obviously to raising teacher pay and to, you know, addressing some of the other issues that he outlined in the speech. But it's going to take quite a bit of work, quite a bit of consensus to even, you know, arrive at any kind of viable plan to fund highways that can pass this General Assembly.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker?
Well, I think my takeaway on that was the theme, he reiterated it throughout, was one of collaboration, of that partnership. I mean, together was the theme. I mean, it was, we're going to do this together, and trying to kind of set that tone in this speech to the members that he was going to have to work with to come up with these plans and fine-tune whether it be highways or transformation or whatever the topic is. And so it really stressed that we were going to have to do it together. And then again, I really kind of I think that he was really kind of trying to make sure that he didn't predispose the conversation on a lot of these topics. And I think that was wise. I think it was a good move as they start the session, that it wasn't going to be my way, that you had to come around to my way of thinking, but we're going to be open, we're going to have a dialogue about this. And I think that was a good step to take, and as they commence this process, and we'll see how much, you know, that goodwill it generates and how that works out for him. And I'm sure he has kind of a roadmap, and he'll work to try to get everybody on board with that, and I think it was a good start.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, more than one half of the speech was, again, you know, talking about his accomplishments in his first term, which, again, is his prerogative, and I think, you know, obviously helps him set the tone for, you know, achievement in his second term. You know, I would just say, you know, my interpretation, especially, you know, having listened to the speech after having read it, is that, you know, I think the stuff that's in the speech that he talked about is the stuff that he feels like he can pass, that there's already consensus around, because while his tax cut plan, you know, I'm sure will be debated vigorously, it's also the product of a tax reform task force that has done a lot of work over the last year and a half to kind of get to that point. He probably feels reasonably confident about passing it. You know, some of the other priorities he outlined, including, you know, the transformation of government, which again is going to be a major initiative of his. I think he feels like, you know, this legislature, especially with its Republican supermajority, will get behind. But you know, there are quite a few issues that I think he decided, you know, to kind of be hands off of, because we don't really know how it's going to go, and a legislative session is unpredictable and a lot of competing interests, and with tax cuts being the priority, a much smaller, you know, pool of money to work with.
Yeah, and that seemed to me to be an undercurrent in the speech. He emphasized time and again the cuts that. The great theme was how we have shrunk government in Arkansas over the last, you know, 4 years, cutting programs and cutting staff, affecting efficiencies. Some on the other end of the spectrum might disagree with that necessarily, but that seemed to be what he was emphasizing. Look what we had now, a tax cut on top of that, so we'll keep it up. And when he talked about investments, for example, in corrections and in higher education, early childhood education, higher teacher pay, these things approach the mandatory in some respects.
Well, and I think and they're also product of a legislative process, and a lot, I mean, like with teacher salaries, that was a part of the adequacy recommendation from the education committees. And so you've got things that have been being worked on for a while, whether it was a task force, working group, adequacy committee, you've got those things. And so I agree with Warwick. You know, that's territory where he can feel relatively confident that they can get to solutions fairly quickly and be able to pass and move through those things, because there has been work already been done on that in an official capacity. And so, and there has been on highways too. I mean, there was a working group. There's templates out there for them to work off of as they move forward, and I think that's why it got a mention. I think had he just completely cut that, then that would have been a sign that, hey, we don't know that we're going to be able to get anywhere. But I think the fact that it was in here was kind of a statement there to everybody and a reassurance that we're going to get it done and we're going to be able to do it together.
Yeah. One last thing on highways is how likely is it, up to and including a lead pipe cinch, that whatever emerges from this General Assembly will in fact be passed on to the electorate, referred to the electorate?
I think it's better than 50%. I think just because in order to create even a new source of revenue, which I think is going to be important, because I don't think general revenue is going to be a viable option in this particular budget to fund highways to the degree that they want to fund them. And by the way, that the governor has said that he sort of wants a minimum of $200 million up to about $400 million. At least that's what I've read in the newspaper through his public comments, that there's this sort of 200 to 400 million range, which is a huge range, obviously, but that he'd like to see in new money for highways, and that's not going to come out of general revenue, I think, in the current environment. So that means doing something different, which in essence requires taking something to the voters, I think, besides the fact that just politically it's much more likely that you'd want the cover of the voters of Arkansas passing this rather than being that legislator or group of legislators that quote-unquote passed a tax increase, because that's something I think people will wrap around certain people's necks and kill them with.
Yeah,
so,
Jeremy Gillum, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, that I think it will be a component of it. I think there will be other things that probably the General Assembly might could take care of on their own, and I think will do what they can there. But the voters have been known to change their minds, from year to year occasionally, and so I think the membership has that kind of working through their mind that, just because they're telling me right now, 2 years from now when I'm back on the ballot, they may have changed their mind, and but if they're the ones that did it, then they're not going to be able to blame me solely for this being implemented. And so I think that's definitely part of the thought process going through the General Assembly right now, is let's get them involved, and then that way the voters we've all did this together. It wasn't just me. But I do think that there will be maybe some things that they can deal with on their own that I think they will if they can.
Jeremy Gillum, Warwick Saban, and yours truly will be taking a little break here for about a half hour or so, just to bring you up to speed on what's going on at the Capitol. It's a little bit of downtime for the governor and Mrs. Hutchinson. Shortly, in fact, in about a half hour, we would, if the trains run on time, we would expect the governor to proceed to the steps of the Arkansas State Capitol and a public address where the themes may be slightly different, the particulars slightly different. We will return at that time with continuing live coverage. Thank you for being with us so far. We'll see you in about a half hour. And hello again from the AETN studios in Conway, Arkansas. Steve Barnes with former Speaker Jeremy Gillum of the Arkansas House of Representatives and former Representative Warwick Saban. We will pick up our coverage with the inaugural of Asa Hutchinson, the 46th elected governor of Arkansas. Within the last hour, or certainly the last 90 minutes, Mr. Hutchinson, of course, took the oath of office in the House of Representatives chamber, the state capitol, from Chief Justice Dan Kemp, and delivered a speech to the General Assembly, a joint session, outlining his objectives for the coming legislative session and touching on a few of what he regards as his and the legislature's accomplishments in the previous 4 years. Gentlemen, what are we going to look for now when he is on the steps of the state capitol, as he will be in just a few minutes, and we'll deliver a second address, this one for a slightly broader audience?
Yeah, and this seems like a loftier address. I mean, the first address to the joint session was a sort of a state of the state. It allowed people to get a sense of what he considered to be his accomplishments in his first term and what he hopes to accomplish in this legislative session that just began yesterday. But the speech that he's about to give on the Capitol steps, again, appealing to sort of broader issues, talking about the state as a whole, but not really outlining any specific policy that I can see.
I think this one will be more inspirational. It'll be more drawing the state together, setting that vision, on a larger scale for the state as a whole. And I think you'll keep the theme of togetherness, and the fact that we're going to have to work together in order to accomplish the goals and that he's laid out, as well as those of the General Assembly and the rest of the state want to see accomplished as well.
One thing that was totally absent from, I believe, from Mr. Hutchinson's address before the joint session, and prudently so probably, not unexpectedly, was the absence of any mention of the so-called hot button social issues, which are attendant to every legislative session. We're talking about gun legislation, abortion legislation. There's a stand your ground legislation that's due to come up. Stay away from those in a speech that you want to be inspirational.
Yes, in a speech like this, you're trying to unite, everyone towards a greater vision, and Laurel Warwick's terminology there, it's a loftier, more bigger picture type speech, and those are there. Everybody knows they're going to be there. They're going to be a part of the session, but he wants to set this tone that this is bigger than those issues, that we've got more important things to be focused on as a whole, and then those will have their due time and course of the discussion.
Well, and we talked a lot, again, previously about the fact that we have a part-time legislature, that we only meet in regular session once every 2 years, and at that only for 90 days. So there's a limited amount of time to really get done the important work that needs to be done in terms of passing a budget and attending to big issues like education, transportation, obviously healthcare. And so a lot of times the issues that you mentioned kind of get you into the ditches. And we have a pretty good tradition here in Arkansas of having pragmatic governors of both parties that are good at, again, basically outlining a moderate agenda and uniting people around those broader themes. And so, again, I think Governor Hutchinson fits perfectly in that tradition, and that's clearly what he's trying to do. I mean, he outlined a very pragmatic agenda for the session, and of course this speech we're about to hear, I think, will sort of be kind of even up at the higher level in terms of kind of where he sees the state going as a whole.
This General Assembly sits, as your successor as Speaker has made clear, Mr. Gillum, and as President Pro Tem Hendren has made clear, sits under a cloud. Sadly, I think by the last count, 7 former members of the General Assembly, most from the Senate, are in serious trouble, either indicted, convicted, or pleaded guilty. Other indictments, it is said, are possible. And Senator Hendren was especially inventive. He seemed to devote the greater part of his address to the Senate chamber yesterday to fairly demanding that Senate clean up its act in terms of ethics legislation. Are we?
Well, again, I mean, it's a big issue. It's one the governor actually has decided, I think, not to address himself. And I have no reason to know this, but if I had to guess, he probably feels like that's the legislature's business. Let the legislative leadership deal with that. Let them pass whatever further ethics, regulations need to be adopted in order to prevent further problems. But I think also the point that you heard, especially from Senator Hendren, but also from Speaker Shepherd, was that this is an issue of character. And I would have to say, as somebody who, again, sponsored, ethics legislation and quite a bit of it, and knowing the need to have it, at the same time, we pretty much already had laws against the stuff that the folks that have been busted were busted for. I mean, it's sort of like if somebody kills someone, we don't need more laws against murder. We just need people to stop killing people. It's the same thing here. I mean, you have bribery. You have, other kinds of just basic fundamental, just basically deviations from character and good government that we need our legislators, number one, to be on top of, and we need lobbyists and other folks that deal with the legislature to be aware of and be understood that you cannot deal with that.
Yeah. And let's cut back to the Capitol. We'll come back to the subject perhaps in just a moment, but let's cut to the Capitol steps here where our cameras are recording. I believe that, yes, Governor and Mrs. Hutchinson making their way toward the podium. That's a State Police Honor Guard with the colors there. And we will, in just a moment, share with you what we've been able to glimpse so far in advance copies, Jeremy Gillum, of Mr. Hutchinson's address.
Well, I think he's obviously excited. This is a tremendous honor for him, and he's going to be, I think, on point, and I think he's ready for this moment.
It has been an extraordinarily public life for Mr. Hutchinson in his early 30s. When he was the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Arkansas, and then both in the executive and legislative branches.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets wrangling, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Please welcome Dr. Fitz Hill to the podium to deliver our invocation.
The state of Arkansas is blessed and grateful to be a part of the land of the liberty. For thee we pray. Please honor me as we bow to our God. Heavenly Father, we know this is the land where our fathers and mothers died. Our state is a part of the Pilgrim's pride. For that, God, we say thank you for letting freedom continue to ring in our nation and the great state of Arkansas in which we reside. God, we ask a special blessing over Governor Asa Hutchinson and his administration, that spiritual discernment will be sought in making decisions that affect each citizen in the state of Arkansas. Our fathers, God, to thee, author of liberty, we pray. Long may our state be bright with freedom's holy light. We pray to protect us by their might. Great God, our King. Amen.
You may be seated. Arkansas's first poet laureate was established by resolutions of the Arkansas General Assembly in 1923. This past year, under the authority of Arkansas Code Annotated 14144, Governor Hutchinson designated and appointed Joe McDougall as the Poet Laureate of the state of Arkansas and commissioned her to write a poem inspired by hope. Please welcome Arkansas's Poet Laureate, Joe McDougall, as she reads, "Anything we want, anything we dream, for the people of Arkansas."
Now that is great service, isn't it, to be escorted? Thank you. For the people of Arkansas, I see Arkansas, a place where children play in the light-filled rotundas of their dreams, where they and we can be anything we want, anything we deem in the rushlight of our days. I see Arkansas, its fields of ambitious grain, Gibraltar mountains, sunsets falling like water, graceful as wind. Its sky, a vault of skittering stars. I see Arkansas, its kingdoms of diversity, rising and falling and rising again. Its people willing to sacrifice for what they taste of splendor, braiding grit and hope, pulling themselves up from adversity. Arkansas, where creativity negotiates with its rugged history, where the future lures like its rivers, silvery and ever-changing. Under the dome of opportunity, I see Arkansas, where hope sets the step and rhythm of our days.
Please stand and welcome Chief Justice Kemp to the podium to administer the oath of office to the Honorable William Asa Hutchinson.
Raise your right hand, say aye in your name.
I, William Asa Hutchinson,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Arkansas,
and the Constitution of the State of Arkansas,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
of the office of Governor for the State of Arkansas,
of the office of Governor of the State of Arkansas,
the official position upon which I'm about to enter. So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Justice. Dave? Please be seated. Mr. Chief Justice, members of the Arkansas General Assembly, constitutional officers, and to the people of Arkansas, with gratitude and in a spirit of humility, I enter my second term as the 46th Governor of Arkansas. I want to recognize my family, my wife and wonderful First Lady, Susan, who has devoted herself to helping those children of our state who have experienced abuse or neglect. Thank you, Susan. I want to introduce my son, Asa III, John Paul and Nubia, Seth and Julia Hutchinson as well, and then my daughter Sarah and her husband Dave. My grandchildren are here, 4 of them, Ella Beth, Malcolm, Isabella, and Pablo. I've got 2 that aren't here, but we'll miss them, Asa IV and Abel. My family is important to me, and I'm grateful that they are here for this important occasion. I want to extend a special welcome to the many foreign dignitaries who are with us. Consuls generals, ambassadors, business leaders, welcome and thank you for coming to this important occasion in Arkansas. Ladies and gentlemen, in the course of time, there are special moments where life and history are intertwined. This day is one of them. The experiences of my life have prepared me for the responsibilities of leading this state. And the story of Arkansas has brought us to this moment. It is a moment in time where we can leave our imprint on history. The moment is here, but the history is yet to be determined. While we are dependent upon a sovereign God who reigns in the affairs of man, it is up to us to shape our future and to make the most of freedom's bounty. We are here today because the people of Arkansas have entrusted us to make the right decisions, to act on their behalf, and to serve with integrity. For those in public service, we should have two constant companions. The first companion is principle. Principles of life that come from faith, hard work, responsibility, and compassion. These principles run deep in the Arkansas Fertile Delta. They are forged in the rocky hills of our Northwest, and they are respected in the pine woods of our Southland. While we all stumble in life, it is our faith, sense of responsibility, and compassion that will get us back on course. The second companion is the public trust. The voters who put us in office expect their elected officials to listen and to be informed, to follow principles and the voice of reason. The people's trust is important to me and will serve as my constant companion throughout the next 4 years. We all agree that Arkansas is an amazing place to live, to raise a family, and to build our own special future. But it hasn't always been easy. Arkansans have had our share of challenge and difficulty. The most challenging time perhaps was during the Great Depression. But even during that time of challenge, our state did not lose population. People stayed here because there was poverty all through the nation. But when the economy boomed again after the war, the jobs out of state offered better pay. Between 1940 and 1960, over 150,000 people left our state. Some of our best left for Michigan, California, and Chicago. But guess what? Now the trend is reversed. People are moving to Arkansas from California, Michigan, and Illinois, and we are retaining our homegrown talent. We are now over 3 million people and growing every day. The lesson is that people will follow opportunity and pursue quality of life, and we in Arkansas have it all. From our treasured Buffalo River to the beauty of a sunrise in the Arkansas Delta, we have it all. That is why we work so hard to be competitive in our tax rates, to fight for industry and businesses to locate here, to build a technology sector, to expand tourism, and to improve access to the arts and to education. As evidence of these new opportunities, we have moved more than 65,000 Arkansans out of poverty and into work. They have jobs that are making more money, and fewer Arkansans are on social benefits. They are working. And we have proven that we can lead in entrepreneurship, agriculture, global retail trade, and technology education. You might ask, why is growth, opportunity, and education so important? Our thinking is often shaped by our life experiences, and a quick glance at my life explains my passion. I was born to John Malcolm and Coral Hutchinson. I was the youngest of 6 children. My mom and dad were hardworking farmers who did not have a college degree, but they valued learning and worked hard so their children could have more opportunities in life. I'm delighted that many of my siblings are here today, and I take pride in our heritage and what we have been given. I enjoy talking with young people, and they often ask, when did you decide that you wanted to be governor? Of course, they are thinking that I planned all of this out early in life. The truth is that when I was in the 5th grade, I wanted to be a farmer just like Dad on the Spavinaw Creek. When I was in high school in Springdale, I worked in Welch's grape juice factory. I was happy there, and I had no real plans beyond high school. I was persuaded to go to college, but I did not know what I wanted to do in life. I picked my major, accounting, because it was the first major listed alphabetically. My senior year, I was inspired by a debate topic on government wiretapping and went to law school. My dream was to become a lawyer who helped people and served the cause of justice. The desire to impact my community led me to run for political office. But it was much later in life that I dreamed about the possibility of running for governor. And it took 8 years longer than I'd hoped to get here. But in my life, it was education that inspired me and gave me the lifelong desire to learn. And education gave me opportunities I never dreamed would be open to me. And so when I speak to the next generation, I remind them that life is not always planned, but in some instances it unfolds. And it unfolds in unexpected ways as learning leads to opportunity. In the last 4 years, we have improved opportunities in Arkansas through education. 4 years ago, I said we needed to teach computer science in every high school in Arkansas. Today, Arkansas leads the nation in computer science education. It started with an idea, a modest investment, and legislative support. It now sets an example for states from California to North Carolina. We have focused on a reading initiative so that students in grade 3 will be reading at grade level. Fundamental principle. It is our reading initiative for student excellence, or RISE. RISE is in over 300 schools, and it is creating a culture of reading with our students that will form the foundation for a lifetime of learning and opportunity. As governor, I have marketed the state of Arkansas on the global stage. I have been to Cuba, I've been to Germany, I've been to China, I've been to Japan. But you know where I first visited all of those countries? It was through books as I was learning and growing up. It is reading that is fundamental to all of the learning that we enjoy. We have raised teacher salaries in Arkansas. We have adopted a higher education funding formula that rewards student progress and achievement, and transformed secondary education to offer students a chance to pursue their dreams through workforce training. And while we have invested more in education, we have a mandate to have a balanced budget in this state. And well, we have done more than that. Working with the legislature, for the first time, the state has a real savings plan. We have changed our state budget from one that spends it all to one that creates savings for more difficult times. We now have the long-term reserve fund. Current balance is over $125 million. I like to learn from history. Through history, we know that our future is brightest when government does not stand in the way of entrepreneurs and small business owners that want to grow and create jobs. Over the last 4 years, we have done exactly that, with more than 80,000 jobs being created by industries located in Arkansas or expanding in this state. Our job is to create an environment in this state that encourages and rewards job creation and higher wages. I have always promoted a growth agenda in Arkansas, and the people understand the energy and the hope that it brings. We cannot let them down. And that brings us to this time in the story of our state. Let's not this moment in history pass us by, but let us work together for success. Together, let's make history by reversing the trend of high taxes in Arkansas. Let's make history by transforming state government. Let's make history by raising teacher pay to historic levels and focusing on a growth agenda that allows Arkansans to prosper. Yes, today is just a moment in time where life and history are intertwined. Governing is shaped by the times in which we live. For our first president, George Washington, it was forming a new government and setting a pattern of selfless service. For our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln, it was preserving the Union through his own resolve and sacrifice. For Franklin D. Roosevelt, it was bringing our nation safely through the Depression and war. For Ronald Reagan, it was the need for an economic resurgence and winning the Cold War. For George W. Bush, it was 9/11 attack and fighting the global war on terrorism. How will our moment in history be defined by the time in which we live? We only see in part now, and what we see is exciting and filled with opportunity. We live in a time of technology, and we are not only preparing our young people to work in the tech industry, but we are bringing the tech industry to them. Their future opportunities, from blockchain to data analytics to cybersecurity, are right here in our state. We live in a time of expanded global commerce. We are supplying the global marketplace with our rice, soybeans, beef, and poultry. And our retail industry leaders are competing in the world of e-commerce and supply chain logistics. We live in a time of millennials and Z generation who value privacy and the sense of community at the same time. Arkansas wants to attract the new workforce who wants downtown living, kayaking, and bike trails. And sadly, today we live in a time of division. Our nation has differing views on seemingly everything. This is not historically unusual, but the shrillness of the division distracts us from getting things done. Our response in Arkansas is to lead by example. We can sort through the differences and find the place of agreement to make a difference in life. That, to me, is the essence of public service and governing. These are things we know about the present, but what we don't know are the unforeseen challenges that lie ahead. I am grateful for the men and women who serve in the Arkansas National Guard, who serve and protect our citizens so faithfully. But the greatest confidence we have in the future is that the people of the United States understand freedom and how it is the bond that unites us and guides our path. We also understand the responsibility that comes with freedom. Those two together shield us as a nation and state from drifting afar from the center line of our providential destiny. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and may God bless you, our nation, and the people of the great state of Arkansas.
Remain standing as we welcome Pastor Sam Bailey to the podium to deliver our benediction.
Let's bow our heads for prayer. Father, thank you for these encouraging words from our governor. Lord God, we are so lifted up and so blessed today to have the leadership of Asa William Hutchinson, his wife, our First Lady, Susan Burrell Hutchinson, their children and their grandchildren. And we pray, Lord, your favor upon their lives. Lord, that you would bless them over this next term of leadership as never before, and that blessing would flow out across this state to every inhabitant. They would all experience the divine favor of God under the leadership of this family. Lord, we pray especially for those that are downtrodden. We pray for those who are hurting and suffering today, and thank you that our governor and his wife have compassion on these people, and they're doing so much to help the hurting. Lord, thank you that you led by example and you showed us the way when Jesus left the glory of heaven, born of a virgin, living a sinless life, and then dying on the old rugged cross and giving your life and blood to be resurrected the third day that we might have eternal life through the free gift of God, which is salvation. Lord, thank you for that example that is beyond any other imaginable. And now, Lord, we pray with our Jewish family and friends here in Arkansas and around the world, the Shema, Shmar Israel Adonai Erahut, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And all of God's people said, amen.
And back in our studio in Conway with former Speaker Jeremy Gillum and former State Representative Warwick Sabin. Gentlemen, speech pretty much what we expected it would be. Kind of broadly thematic, call to arms, if you will, but a gentle one.
It was. I thought it was a great speech. I thought it was great in tone for, not only the beginning of the session and what comes over the next 90 days as far as the General Assembly goes, but I thought it was great in setting the tone for what he wants the next 4 years to be like under his leadership.
Yeah, Warwick?
Yeah, he discussed some specific issues that he's dealt with as governor and those that he, I think expects to deal with in his second term. But of course, he also tried to tie himself to the broader themes of American history and of course the history of our state, and appealing to a sense of, consensus, basically, that, we do live right now in some pretty divisive times. And in order to get things done, we need to transcend that, and we do that by appealing to everybody's sense of duty and purpose and agreement that we want to have the best interests of our state in mind.
We mentioned earlier in the morning on the broadcast that the composition of both chambers of the General Assembly shifted just a little bit, although not one iota in terms of partisan makeup. Excuse me, in sessions past, if there have been spirited, bordering on bitter debates, they have been over particular issues and not on a partisan basis. In point of fact, Arkansas General Assembly has always been a fairly conservative institution, which kind of lends itself to the collegiality that we were also talking about earlier.
It is, and I think historically too, you see more of the urban versus rural divides as far as how those conversations, whether they were spirited or borderline bitter, have always kind of played out on topics and issues as a whole. And so, I think he's been cognizant of that since day one of his first term, is that, he wanted to be that person that brought people together and helped create a solution. And I think he did a great job of that his first term. And it's obvious from today's messages that he intends on maintaining that presence in the state as somebody that can bring people together and unite and move us forward.
He has paid over the years rather a bit of attention to, for example, rural broadband.
Yes.
Expanding services to rural Arkansas. He's quite aware of that divide.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, and I think you're going to see him work on that in the next 4 years. I think it's going to be something that maybe he didn't mention in line item in today's speeches, but I think it's something that is near and dear to his heart, and I think you'll see him work on that in the next 4 years, because it's a key component for a lot of the things that I think he wants to accomplish before he leaves office.
A lot of tech talk in there.
Yeah.
Well, it's a critical issue, and I almost wish he had mentioned it, and we did work real hard on it, in the time that we were in the legislature. But I was struck, there was a sentence in here about Arkansas wanting to attract members of the new workforce who want downtown living, kayaking, and bike trails, and that actually stood out to me, because to your point, we kind of used to have this urban-rural divide, and a lot of that came down to Little Rock versus the rest of the state. But interestingly now, in community and economic development, even very small towns understand that revitalizing a downtown square or those areas of town that bring people together, that create a certain quality of life. Certainly Northwest Arkansas has more than discovered that, and you've had a lot of investment in all of the towns from Fayetteville to Springdale to Bentonville to Siloam Springs in terms of
you
building
left out Rogers. Let's not do that.
Sorry, I left out Rogers. I apologize to all the Rogers viewers. But there's a bike trail, by the way, connecting all of those cities, which is pretty darn impressive. And the whole idea behind it is to attract talent and to bring in the workforce and ensure that the new technology companies would actually want to locate in all of these places. And I think that's a good strategy for the future for our state. And it's something, again, that does bind, finally, rural and urban areas together.
Well, that's good, because while this may not dominate this session of the General Assembly, the demographic trends to this point are pretty clear. Arkansas, like so many other smaller states, is rapidly urbanizing. Now, some of us can remember when Jonesboro had 3 traffic lights. Well, now it's got 3,000, all right, and you need a map to get around Jonesboro. You see, Northwest Arkansas is this metropolis. Fort Smith making a comeback, and of course you've got Little Rock as well. The 3rd and the 4th congressional districts and rural Arkansas is just hemorrhaging population and has been for some time. That's going to create a whole new set of issues for policymakers, executive and legislative, in terms of the delivery of services, education, healthcare, the works.
Well, and I think you see legislative leadership, caucus leadership, you know, they're having those discussions. I mean, you can see in their remarks of the last few weeks, especially after the election, that it's something they want to key on and have, you know, these kind of conversations from a policy standpoint in the session. I think you'll see some of those kind of bear out and maybe come to fore in specific topics, especially like transportation, which we've spent a lot of time on today. But I think you're going to see it come back when you're having discussions on broadband and you're having discussions on a lot of these key issues on how do we mitigate, you know, and still create an environment in the rural parts that kind of mitigates that transfer of population to the urban areas and still provide a high quality of life in those areas. And that's going to be a tough thing to do for our friends and colleagues that remain in the legislature and for the governor and his administration.
Yeah, Warwick?
Oh, well, this is an issue that the whole nation is facing. I mean, there isn't a day that goes by that I don't read an article about the urban-rural divide and how that dictates, you know, economics, health disparities, education disparities. There's all kinds of different issues involved with that. And to your point, you know, this is a process that's been going on in Arkansas for decades, starting with, you know, the mechanization of agriculture. But now, you know, we're really kind of at a crisis point because, you know, we have had towns that have hollowed out in our rural areas. Access to health care is much, much more difficult when rural hospitals are closing, when rural health clinics are closing. But technology can help bridge those gaps, you know, through things like telemedicine. Yeah. And, you know, the same thing in terms of the delivery of education and using the internet to do commerce. And so we really do need broadband as well as, you know, new ways of delivering services and thinking through these issues, because otherwise we're going to have you know, big problems like the opioid epidemic that we're facing and other things that are hurting the ability of our state, which is primarily a rural state. I mean, we cannot leave any part of this state behind or neglect any part of it in any way, shape, or form, because we're only 3 million people. We're all in this together. Sometimes we forget, by the way, that the Delta was the most prosperous part of the state. Yeah. Northwest Arkansas was, you know, the sticks. Right. And obviously those fortunes have reversed. But we need to remember that so that we don't, you know, leave the Delta behind, that we remember that, you know, what can happen to one region can happen to the other, and we're all in this together.
Yeah. To borrow from Eric Severide, you can't say your end of the boat is leaking. Yeah, that's right.
That's exactly
well, and I think you're going to see this bear out in looking at, you know, how do we, you know, address those population shifts and everything in the legislative session, in scope of practice conversations, you know, nurses and their role and a lot of other healthcare areas as well. And I think you're going to see this as a theme, an undercurrent, so to speak, probably in a lot of discussions that will take place over the next 3 months there at the Capitol.
Right. Closing thoughts, Warwick Saban?
Well, just that it is going to be, once again, an interesting session. You know, we have a governor in a very strong position, having, you know, been reelected, starting his second term, ready to, you know, accomplish goals that he's outlined for quite some time. And he's got, you know, I think the legislative leadership to help him do it. But, you know, the sticking points, I think, are definitely going to be highway funding, the tweaking of the tax plan, and if anything kind of, you know, rears its ugly head when it comes to Medicaid expansion, we may see that kind of throw a wrench in the works. But otherwise, they may be able to make some efficient work of these big ticket items that they've outlined.
So the Republican gubernatorial primary, one indication we look for, and that was how strong is Asa Hutchinson's position with Republican voters in Arkansas, and pretty strong.
Yes. And I think
he had a candidate get to the right of him, but she didn't get very far.
No, and I think you see that in how, you know, the party is rallying behind Governor Hutchinson. You'll see it, I think, in these early stages of the session, and how that the Republican majorities in the House and the Senate, kind of come behind him. And obviously there's going to be some difference of opinions. You know, it's going to be that way even with Senator Hendren, you know, Senate President now. I mean, they're family, but he's going to differ on some things. I mean, but at the end of the day, if it's one thing I've learned in serving with the men and women that are in that body, you know, and especially the three primary leaders going into this session is they are very, very capable men. They are good at what they do, and I look for them to work together and really have a lot of success this session. I think Speaker Shepard and President Hendren are going to do great jobs, and I think you saw Governor Hutchinson set a really, really strong tone today and how he wants the session and the next 4 years to go, and I think he's going to be extremely successful.
And with that, gentlemen, we thank you for coming in. Former Speaker Jeremy Gillum, former Representative Warwick Saban. Guys, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching. And this concludes our coverage of the inaugural of Asa Hutchinson, the 64th governor of Arkansas, beginning his second 4-year term. 46th, excuse me, I said 64? Well, 46th. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time.